Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this morning. My name is Jalian Yang, Director of Storytelling and Communications at Ford through Ferguson. I'm joined by my colleague here, Madhav Narayan, who will be facilitating this conversation. We're going to let people roll into this room as we get started, and then we will get started once some more people join us. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ja. Like Ja said, my name is Madhav Narayan. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Data for through Ferguson, and we're just gonna give it a little bit. Good morning, Anita.
Good morning.
Morning, Benjamin. Your face was very blurry for a second there.
It was.
No, Zoom is never
Remember
done
that very
that
late filter, like, because she always has that like blur. That's what it looked like.
Well, it is a great time for us to be talking about honest elections. And so I really look forward to the conversation today. Thanks so much for taking the time. For people who don't know, Anita and Benjamin will be joining St. Louis on the Air for the Politically Speaking Hour tomorrow. So tune in. They will be at St. Louis Public Radio at 12:15 to 1 for a 20-minute show. And I really thank them for sharing their expertise, not just today, but also tomorrow. And that will be on wherever you get podcasts and also on the radio after that show is done. But like I mentioned, St. Louis on the Air is live tomorrow, and you'll get to hear more about honest elections tomorrow.
Thanks so
I'm
much.
going to put in the chat the link to the report for people to check out in the meanwhile.
Sounds great. As people are kind of rolling on, I figure I can give you a quick run through of our time here today. We're going to start with some brief introductions of ourselves and the panelists that will be speaking today. And then we'll transition into a very brief presentation on the process we took and the Honest Elections Coalition as a whole. And then the bulk of our time together will be spent asking our wonderful panelists questions this morning, and then we will shift over to Q&A after that point. So hang tight for just another minute or two as folks roll in, and then we will get going.
This is a really great time to take a sip of coffee or tea or whatever you need to wake up. I'm myself drinking a matcha latte, one of those kind of pre-mixed drinks, just makes your life easier. And I know that as the weather is getting cooler, these cozy drinks are very necessary. So at this time, I'm putting in the chat the presentation. I know sometimes people will share the presentation after the webinar, but I think just for the purposes of anyone who wants to follow along while we're presenting, I think it's fine to share. So what I'll do is just pop it in the chat, and I will make sure to also share screen during the actual webinar so that everyone can follow along.
Right. We're gonna go ahead and get started, I think, and then folks can continue to roll on as they are able to. So welcome again. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us here today. My name is Madhav Narayan. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Data at Forward Through Ferguson, one of the organizations that are part of the Honest Elections Coalition. On the call with me, I have my wonderful colleague, Jialian Yang, who you heard, who is the Director of Storytelling and Communications at Forward Through Ferguson. And then we also have our panelists that are going to be joining us today. We have two of them on the call, and then the third one is working through some technical issues at the moment, and she will be joining us. But I can go ahead and introduce you to the two that we have here right now. First, we have Benjamin Singer, the CEO of Show Me Integrity. He has worked with Republican, Democratic, and Independent reformers since 2012 on local, state, and federal advocacy campaigns to create a more effective ethical government of, by, and for the people. He has worked on ethics, campaign finance, redistricting, and electoral reforms with leaders across the political spectrum, including Senator John Danforth, Senator Job Schaff, and Tishara Jones. His work has been featured in TV, radio, and newspaper outlets across the nation. Thanks so much for joining us here today, Benjamin. Say hello.
Hi, Madhav. Really excited, and thank you to all the participants who've joined us.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. Next, we have Dr. Anita Manion, who is an assistant professor in political science and affiliate faculty in gender studies at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Anita's research focuses on the impact of policy on issues of equity, particularly in areas of local government, elections, and education, including research on campaign finance in St. Louis City and County. She's the political analyst for the NBC News affiliate in St. Louis and provides political insight for a variety of media outlets in the region. Anita's work has been recognized with the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching, the Excellence in Civic Engagement Award, the Excellence in Collaborative Research Award, and the Women's Trailblazer Award. Welcome, Anita. Thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And the last person who is going to be joining us is still experiencing some technical difficulties, but that person's name is Rochelle Walton Gray, who they are currently a manager of government relations at a Red Circle. And Rochelle Gray brings extensive expertise in diverse government facets. She's served as a legal administrator at a local law firm for almost 30 years and has been a dedicated community advocate since before 2008. She has a wealth of knowledge and policy that stems from her extensive experience at both the state and local levels. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition into the short little presentation that we have for you all today about the Honest Elections Report Summary. So as I kind of mentioned at the start of the call, we are the Honest Elections Coalition. That coalition includes folks from Forward Through Ferguson, Empower Missouri, Red Circle, and Show Me Integrity. And we've been doing a lot of work over the past, I guess, year and change at this point, putting together a report based on a survey that we did around the idea of democracy dollars. And we'll get into what that is in a little bit. Could I get the next slide, please? So introduction to us at the table, the Honest Elections Coalition is advocating for a more equitable election system in St. Louis County, focusing on communities impacted by racism and political disenfranchisement. The coalition has conducted research and engaged with experts to develop a Democracy Dollars program for public campaign funding. Next slide, please. So the problem that we kind of sat with as we were coming together to do this work is that when you think about political campaigns, large donations from wealthy donors have a disproportionately large impact on political campaigns. There's less attention generally given for average voters and potential favoritism towards wealthy interests. So this disparity is strongest at the local level, where the wealthiest donors outnumber the general population. Next slide, please. This is fairly recent data, but in the year of 2023, we saw that $36.3 million went to PACs backing single candidates, and there were 106 donations of over $100,000 or more. Next slide, please. And like we said before, it's strongest at the local level, where the wealthiest donors outnumber the general population. So what are democracy dollars? Democracy dollars is an idea for a public financing system that encourages small donations from voters to fund political campaigns. It reduces the influence of wealthy donors and requires candidates to gather signatures and limit large contributions. Next slide. The program also aims to increase voter candidate connections and diversity in campaign contributors. So as part of this program, candidates would not be allowed to accept large donations from government contractors, lobbyists, PACs, etc. Here we have a screenshot of one of the questions that we asked in the survey to community members, and most of the participants indicated that they rarely or never donate to political candidates. So the case study that kind of this stems off of was the Democracy Dollars Initiative in Seattle. The program in Seattle, implemented in 2017, allowed citizens to financially support local elections. And this program has increased participation among minority groups and low-income residents, and has led to a 53% increase in individual campaign donations. It's also served the purpose of motivating incumbents to reach out to constituents and create more effective policies. So even if it's not new local candidates coming to the plate, it's causing a larger engagement from incumbent candidates as well. Next slide, please. So the lowest income Seattle residents were overrepresented in the Democracy Dollar program, and this also served to close the gap in donations from big money donors and the highest income residents. You can see the total, oh, sorry. You're fine. The figure to the right shows the total voucher usage in 2017, 2019, and 2021, and those numbers steadily ticking upward over time. And then for town hall findings, our coalition hosted a town hall meeting in Florissant. We had a robust discussion among 20 participants, and our coalition presented information about the potential program, answered questions, and saw input on different parts of the program. And then participants preferred a 1.5% sales tax on out-of-state purchases to fund the program with full transparency for certificate donations. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause for a second here. Just give Anita and Benjamin an opportunity to chime in. They have a lot more context about some of this stuff than I do, since it's their wheelhouse. Anything I'm missing here, either Anita or Benjamin?
No, I think in the discussion, I'll dig a little bit more into some of those maps you've shown, but I think this is a good overview so far.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you so much. All right. And then the solution that we also look to is like, how could this program help in St. Louis County? So there are two main goals of this program: largely broader accountability to all voters, regardless of income, and decreasing influence from large donations and special interests. Businesses and high-income individuals dominate campaign donations in St. Louis County, and we know that this harms low-income voters. And then corruption in St. Louis County has been a persistent issue, with office holders accused of trading government contracts for campaign contributions. Next slide, please. We hope that this program will improve voter diversity and engagement. St. Louis campaign finance policies disadvantage lower income voters due to fundraising demands. And then democracy dollars will also help reduce the zip code gap in campaign finance by incentivizing outreach to marginalized areas and increasing participation among young, low income, and minority voters. So off to the right here, this is another snippet from a survey that we did where we asked people, what do you believe elected officials care most about? And as you can see here, the overwhelming majority said that elected officials care most about the interest of big donors or receiving funding for their campaign. Very little people thought that community interests and or my interests were the priority. As far as specific policy recommendations, Benjamin, do you want to take this bit real quick?
Sure, happy to. And as Madhav was saying, this was a very community-driven process. We did community surveys, we did a scientific poll, we did a town hall, and there was overwhelming demand for this, which is not surprising considering that the policy is based on the Seattle policy, which really trailblazed this idea of democracy dollars and these certificates that voters get. And of course, that was driven by a citizen initiative. So again, coming from the people who feel marginalized. So here are the ways that we feel that that can be changed and that the people of St. Louis have said they also want to give them agency and control over our political system. So first, before candidates are able to qualify for democracy dollars, the way that they do that is by showing that they have community support, which means collecting 200 signatures, as well as, I believe the number was 200 private donations of at least $10. So traditionally, we're used to a money primary where it's who can raise the most $5,000 checks. In this case, it's get regular people to sign and give you $10 to show you have community support. Next slide, please. So this is an example of what a democracy dollar looks like in Seattle. Each resident gets 4 $25 vouchers, and they can submit it either online with a unique code or in person to a candidate campaign. So the way that they do it in Seattle, like I said, 4 $25 vouchers. Here, we're recommending the same thing, but specify 2 of those are to be used for top of the ticket countywide races like county executive or assessor or prosecuting attorney, or if it's at the state level, governor, US Senate, etc. And then reserve 2 of those for down ticket races, the legislative races for county council, to ensure that at the legislative level as well, where the laws are really being made, that's also citizen driven. Next slide, please. Same way they do it in Seattle and learning on how we can do it better, mail them to all participants, all legal residents of St. Louis County who are eligible to vote. Even if they're not yet registered, they're eligible. And as we'll talk about later, this system actually made people more likely to register and vote. And if they lose certificates, they can request new ones and the old ones become invalid. Next slide, please. Again, voters can redeem those by mail or physically giving them or online with a serial number and identity verification. This is really important, and this was something that took significant deliberation up front, is to prevent the system from being subject to political influence in terms of how it's administered. It really needs to be administered by a new independent county ethics commission. There is no board or commission that currently has what we believe is sufficient independence to administer this, and this would require a new one. And as we saw in community surveys and in scientific polling, there was significant support for a new independent ethics body. Of course, St. Louis County and Missouri are not Seattle. We're more politically diverse in a variety of ways, and election security and integrity and corruption are going to be significant considerations for folks in St. Louis County and in Missouri. So we need sufficient protections to ensure that candidates are prohibited from, and voters are prohibited from selling, buying certificates, and that voters can verify the certificate appropriation online. Personally, I was surprised when we asked participants at our North County Town Hall how they felt about how to verify that vouchers are being allocated or not allocated according to the will of the voter. because one way it can be done is fully transparent, where anyone can go online and see how every voucher was allocated. See that I can see that Anita supported candidate X and Madhav supported candidate Y. Personally, I thought people were going to be hesitant for that level of transparency and having their employer or whatnot see how it was allocated. But overwhelmingly, the demand by the people in the room at our town hall was for full transparency, which also gives full security to ensure that no one is allocating a voucher in your name without your knowledge. Also, this is also very important, and we may cover it later. The last line on that previous slide, apologies, was that we all know this. Everyone and their mother, every candidate and their mother has an independent PAC, quote unquote, independent PAC. And Missouri has some of the looser laws in the country about allowing candidates to fundraise directly for these independent PACs, which accept unlimited donations, which would allow candidates to totally go around the system, the spirit of the system, and the letter in terms of allowing these independent entities. The only reason they're called independent is because they can't coordinate the expenditure. But if I'm running for office and someone who's run all my previous campaigns goes and runs the independent PAC, it's meaningless. So we had an experienced election attorney, Chris Grant, who works a lot with organized labor and other political candidates on campaign finance issues. And he found that St. Louis County, as a charter county, can prohibit candidates for raising money for independent PACs to cut down on the abuse of the current system. And that's not an indictment of any of the current officials. That's just the system they've been handed. And so that's how they're using it. Madhav, do you want me to talk about the funding of the program?
I can wrap this up real quick.
Sure.
So for funding the program, we did ask folks in the survey how they would support, how they would want a program like this to be funded, and whether or not they would support public funding for the program. And so a large proportion of folks either supported or strongly supported the use of public funding for the program. Some folks were unsure or didn't answer, but as far as public funding goes, the program would require about $3 million annually to be raised and appropriated to the Honest Elections Fund. And we talked about potential funding sources such as property taxes for residents, sales tax on out-of-state purchases, and futures tax on autonomous taxis and vacant properties. Next slide, please. And so in conclusion, the coalition, after a multi-year investigation, has developed a program to ensure elected officials prioritize the needs of the St. Louis region's residents over fundraising. The program aims to ensure elected officials prioritize serving the people and will be shared with the community in Missouri to promote a government accountable to all. Perfect. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move into our panel discussion. But before that happens, Ja, if you are on, it looks like Rochelle is in the room. I think Rochelle just needs a promotion to panelist. If that is something that you're able to handle real quick, that would be great. But while we're getting that squared away, oh, thanks so much, Ja. Let's go ahead and get started. The first question I had was actually for you, Anita. Given your body of research and the work that you have done, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on how the racial wealth gap intersects with political power?
Yeah, absolutely. Colleagues and I looked at campaign contributions to St. Louis City mayoral elections and St. Louis County executive elections from 2011 to 2021. We got that information from the Missouri Ethics Committee to try to understand who's contributing to campaigns and who's benefiting. And we found that donors for those two highest profile offices in the region are geographically and economically unrepresentative of our population. So campaigns for those offices are funded by a very small set of elite individual donors. We also find differences in the campaign contributions that women and Black candidates receive. They receive smaller dollar donations than white male candidates. And we find that the donors are concentrated in neighborhoods that are wealthy and predominantly white. So we see this evidence of representational distortion based on where the contributions are coming from. And our study is not the only one to find these sorts of things, but we did focus it here in St. Louis, so we really know what's happening in our region. And I know you put some of the maps from our study in your presentation, but if you don't mind, I think the next part of the question was about St. Louis City and County. And so I'd like to just maybe share a couple of those maps and help unpack those a little.
Sure. Ja, would you mind resharing the presentation?
Here, I actually have the slides here if that
Oh,
works.
perfect. Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Okay. So when you look at these maps, that sort of part on the right is St. Louis City, and the larger part is the county and all those municipalities. And you can see on the left, the contributions, these are the dollar amounts. So the really dark ones are the per capita contributions are above $200. So that little black squarish municipality there is Ladue, you have Clayton, Creve Coeur. So that I-40 corridor is where we have a lot of wealth here in the county. And that's where we see the highest per capita contributions coming from. If you take that and compare it to the map on the right, where we look at average household income in the city and county, you can also see that's where the wealth is concentrated, and that's where the contributions are coming from. And then here on these maps, you can see that was per capita contributions. This is the sum by zip code. So each of those municipalities, you can see that in municipalities like Clayton and Ladue, you're having the sum of contributions more than $1 million coming from those municipalities. But when you look at the map on the right, this shows us where the concentration of Black St. Louisans live, with the darkest parts being more than 75% Black population. And you can see that these are basically inverse maps, that our contributions are concentrated in areas that are predominantly white and are not coming from areas that are predominantly Black in the region. And then one final map here, this is contributions per 1,000 people. And so these are how many are made by the region. And again, you can see it doesn't matter if we talk about per capita dollar amount, total dollar amount, or number of contributions. There is a big skew towards that wealthy corridor there that's really influencing our elections.
Thanks so much, Anita. It's really awesome to see kind of a visual depiction of how all that breaks down. And personally, I find it very interesting that in this and many other systems, we see similar maps of indicators in our region particularly. So thank you so much. The next question I have is for Benjamin. We mentioned the Democracy Dollars program in Seattle. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Seattle's approach to the problem. How did their particular system work? What were the results? And then are there any other similar models elsewhere?
It's a great question, and speaks to a question we actually got from reporter Rudy Keller of The Independent yesterday about this report, because there were forms of public financing of elections across the country before. They were largely not working that well, and there were still great disparities in who was able to participate. Some early versions were block grants to politicians if they qualified and got to run. That didn't feel good to people, to just give politicians' campaigns a huge chunk of money, of taxpayer money. Another version was tax credits, where if you made a donation, you could claim it as a credit on your next year's taxes. Well, that doesn't really help people who can't afford now to be making political donations, and they're the most in need and the most ignored by our political system. And by the way, huge welcome to former county councilwoman and state legislator Rochelle Walton Gray. Hi, Rochelle. So to wrap up answering your question, Madhav, there had been a gold standard of multiple matching system that had happened in New York and was spreading quickly to Denver, to Baltimore, Montgomery County, Maryland. But again, it required people to chip in some of their own money and up to, let's say, $100 would be matched 7-1. So that helped candidates who only had access to more modest donors. But again, not equitable for people who already feel like the political system doesn't work for them. Why should I hand over my precious dollars that I need for food and rent and bills to a politician? So there had been this idea from Harvard law professor Lawrence Lessig of these democracy dollars, of vouchers. And activists in Seattle ran with it and tried to get this on the ballot, and they succeeded and they won. And it was a really community-driven process driven by communities of color and young activists in Seattle who felt like the system wasn't working for them. And this was a way to change that. One of those is Esteban Munoz Howard, who is now a national leader in helping shape these help empower other communities to bring these to their own community. And a big problem sometimes for public financing systems is running out of sufficient dollars. So in Seattle, they created a dedicated revenue stream through this ballot initiative. It was the smallest tax increase in Seattle history because as much as we are all disgusted with a lot of the money and the types of money flowing into political campaigns, it's actually relatively little compared to a lot of other expenditures. We're talking 0.005% of government budget to ensure that the other, 0.995 of the government budget is being spent in a way that's really representative of the people's will. And it's been working great. I think we'll talk about those results probably with a different question, I imagine.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. I'm actually, given our flow, I'm gonna pick on you just a little bit again. And the next question I have is, we just heard about Seattle's approach to the problem and similar initiatives elsewhere. How would the Democracy Dollars initiative work in St. Louis County or even in the state of Missouri? And if you wouldn't mind touching on some of the potential benefits and challenges. I know we heard about some of that elsewhere, but in our regional context, what would that look like and where would the money come from?
Great question. And this is part of why this is one of the most difficult reforms, because by definition, you are changing who has power. You're democratizing that power to a much more diverse group of people. And it can also often be hard to fundraise to run these ballot initiatives because for that very reason. So that's one of the big challenges. Another big challenge is, polling shows 90% of people are disgusted with the problem and the political system as it is, but also that 90% of people don't believe change is possible. They're resigned to the status quo. And so that's why this is so important, and having all these people on is so important as community leaders and reporters. And thank you to the reporters who are here, because the big takeaway is change is possible. This is working in other places, and it is allowing a much more representative group of people to run and win. When the people of Missouri voted for Medicaid expansion and the legislature was still dragging its heels, even though there was the will of the people, if you had a representative group of people, many of whom were dependent on Medicaid, being able to run and win or fund their champions to serve in the legislature, maybe we'd have a different way that decisions are made and incentives are shaped in legislative bodies. We as an organization don't have a position on that particular issue. That's a good example of the mismatch between the will of the people and what their representatives are doing under the current system. I think there's probably a lot of skepticism from people of like, oh, this is Missouri or this is St. Louis County, it's not Seattle. Keep in mind, 2 weeks ago, with the election of President Donald Trump, there's so many people across the political spectrum who feel like the political system isn't working for them. They're voting for change. They don't like the status quo. And so let's give the people what they really want, which is a real democracy where they actually feel like they have agency over their lives, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum. Because a lot of these problems of poverty affect people both urban and rural. Some of the rural poverty in Missouri is some of the most devastating. And so I think we'll see strong support across the political spectrum. And that is what we saw in our polling. We saw majority support we saw more people identifying as Republicans, Democrats, and independents in St. Louis County who supported this and wanted to pass this than said, no, I don't want to pass this. And it would work largely similar, but we have the benefit of not being the first. We can see how it was put in place in Seattle and some of the improvements we can make and make it work for the St. Louis County context, and be even better.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. And I'm going to piggyback off of what you said earlier, and warm welcome to you, Rochelle. The next question I actually have is for you. So given what we've talked about with the Honest Elections Coalition at large and the Democracy Dollars Initiative in particular, how do you feel like those two things could give low-income voters in North County more power in local and state government? And I would love to hear your perspective as a former county council person.
Yes, can you hear me first of all? Great. So yes, honest elections, democracy dollars work by providing every eligible voter with funds that they can direct to a political campaign of their choice. So for low income voters in our county, it could have various impacts. So first of all, equalizing influence. Traditionally, candidates with large fundraising um, ability networks, they dominate the campaigns. That's generally how it works. This can marginalize low income communities, and often those communities feel like their voices are not heard, and sometimes it tends to keep them from not wanting to vote, unfortunately. So with democracy dollars, low income voters, they will have a direct impact on supporting candidates, and they can support candidates who actually support their interests. This will give them feel like they have a more equal chance or a more equal um, ability, for lack of a better way, with the wealthier constituents who can afford to make large campaign donations, whereas low income, even median income voters cannot. So again, this could increase voter engagement because, like I said, and voter turnout, because if you're actually helping to fund the campaign, first of all, that gives you a vested interest in that particular candidate, and they want to see that their participation directly impacts elections because they can contribute to campaigns. They may feel more invested in the electoral process and not be so apathetic about voting. And we saw a lot of that even with this last presidential election, with people saying my vote doesn't count because they're not going they're not going to listen to us, is basically what they said. So also this would make it more, the candidates could be more representative of the low income voters, because now you will have candidates who have to actually appeal to these voters when they didn't have to do that before, because they were catering to those who donated to their campaigns, which could have been, should I say, wealthier voters or corporations, PACs, things like that. So you see a lot of that as well. So yes, it could lead to more empowerment in the low income community.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. Moving on, Anita, this next question I have is for you. So we've kind of brushed on aspects of this, but I wanted to ask specifically, how do you feel democracy dollars could make local or state elected officials more responsive to the needs of low-income voters in North County and across St. Louis County? I'm curious to hear some of the insights that you have gathered from the research that you've done as it pertains to this.
Yeah, well, research has shown that when it comes to these really high dollar contributors, their biggest motivation for making those contributions is their concern about their own economic interests. And so they're investing in candidates who they think are going to cut their taxes and make them wealthier. And so when those candidates get elected, that the interest of those large donors can crowd out the interest of everyday people living in neighborhoods in St. Louis County and North County and North City. And so the ability of more people, a larger base with diverse interests to contribute to and influence candidates and campaigns is huge. When we look at local government, though, we talk so much about the presidency and these other federal races, but local governments affect our everyday life. That's our land use, our planning and zoning, taxes, public safety, sanitation, our green spaces, our schools, all of that is determined by local government. So giving people a way to impact those politicians that make those decisions is huge. And when we have such unequal participation like we do now, like we demonstrated in those maps, there is a problem in having democratic accountability. So, if we see large swaths of the county where there's no contributions, where, like Rochelle said, voter turnout rates are lower because people don't feel they have a voice in the system, then there's no reason for politicians to pay attention to those areas. Another step that we're doing in our research is trying to look at some of the responsiveness to certain neighborhoods. And I think all of us have a hunch that this is happening, right? That when there's problems in certain neighborhoods, they get faster attention and more attention than others. And so this is a way to sort of help level that playing field. And I also, think that it can also broaden the universe of who runs for office and whose interests those people represent.
Thanks so much, Anita. Rochelle, I am curious, based on your past experience as an elected official, how do you feel the accountability for elected officials towards their constituents could change under a Democracy Dollars program?
Again, it will reduce the influence of big money donors, especially corporations and PACs. You find, especially at the legislature and the state legislature, should I say, and of course in Congress, that the PACs tend to have a lot of influence on voting, and what bills are filed or which bills are passed or which bills are sent to committee. And that's very unfortunate, especially here in Missouri with term limits. It's often said, and I hate to say this, that lobbyists run the legislature. And that's partially because they donate to candidates. And also, of course, the term limits, they've been there for years and years, even some been there for decades. So this would reduce the influence. It would reduce the reliance of big money donors from candidates. So there's less incentive to cater to corporate interests or PACs. They will be more likely to focus on the needs of their constituents because they're no longer focusing on who donated or who gave them big money donations. And I hate to say those things because I know that some people, and I would say most legislators are not in it for their reason. We're in it. We get in office because we want to help, but it can sway or influence them sometimes. You do have a stronger sense of accountability to your constituents if they're also donating towards you, and you directly you want to earn their support because you know that they can give to you and they can support you directly. So you try to earn their support by working more closely with them because of the use of democracy dollars. There's long-term benefits, as far as you can build a relationship now with your voters, because again, first of all um, they feel more likely to work with you, and we can have more grassroots efforts because our constituents are now coming to us with through this program. And so, it increases the incentive for elected officials to meet the needs of, like we mentioned earlier, low income, median income people and voters. So yes, that's my take on it, as well as some research that I did.
Thanks so much, Rochelle.
Thank you.
Kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit more, we're talking about, we've talked a little about this in the context of um, elected officials, people who are in office, and how they could be accountable to voters. But how do you feel a program like this could change the landscape for who could run, and like what kind of opportunities there could be for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to run a campaign for office? Do you think we would see an influx of folks who are running for local office who otherwise wouldn't be able to?
Most definitely. Money is probably one of the biggest barriers for running for office, especially at different levels. Locally, probably not so much. But once you get to that state level, citywide, countywide, it takes a lot of money to run. So you have some people who would be perfect candidates who simply don't have the funds to run against someone who has the means. So definitely impacts the race. It was impactful in the last August election, more so in the primary than the general, where we see that there were several candidates who were perfect for the office, who had the passion, but they couldn't manage to run against someone who had hundreds of $1,000s in their funds. And it also makes you wonder, again, who are they going to be accountable while they're in office? If you got a $50,000 donation from a group or $10,000 from a person, people voting for them didn't know that, but unfortunately, it did happen, especially like I said in the primary. So if you remove that barrier of having to also fundraise, that takes up a lot of your time. Then you can get more diverse candidates, and that can represent different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, ethnicities, and again, those who traditionally couldn't afford to run would be able to, in that under that perspective. You're not dependent on donations. So again, I mentioned before, you can focus on grassroots efforts, which is really what helps you to win. But if you have to fundraise, or when that other person just mails and mails and mails, and you can't do that, that gives them that second edge in an election. So, of course, so expanding the candidate pool would be excellent with this program. And candidates no longer need to fundraise so extensively, spend time on courting donors, which is something that has to happen sometimes, and that will open up the field. So yeah, this would be perfect to open the field up to more diverse candidates, and candidates who look like you. Not you, but you in the audience.
Thanks so much, Rochelle.
Thank you.
And we have one more question, and then I'm gonna turn it over to each of the panelists to offer any final thoughts. But the last question I have is for our fearless leader, Benjamin. Benjamin, would you say, given everything that we've talked about the coalition and then the Democracy Dollars initiative, how do you feel people could get involved and help make this into a reality?
It's a great question. And as we've spoken to, this is a bold change. And a lot of the existing ways out there that people can get civically involved are not as bold, can sometimes be less transformative, but maybe easier to accomplish. But we see that the energy is out there now in Springfield, where we've considered helping folks put something like this in place. There is a group growing to make changes to money in politics, first starting with one step up the ladder in terms of contribution limits in local government. And then maybe later we'll see an even bigger step up the ladder like this. But we see that political will is there here in St. Louis County, and we'll see if it's there statewide in Missouri. So if you want to be part of that process of helping make this happen where you live, anywhere in Missouri, please join us. The umbrella group that we are forming with folks across the state and across the country to take bolder ballot measures straight to the people is the Respect Voters Coalition. And we're still working on getting the Honest Elections Coalition's website up. So in the meantime, go to respectvoters.org and sign up to join us there. And you'll be given a form, or you can find a form elsewhere on the website where you can indicate your interests and your volunteer interests, and especially and including honest elections and reforming money in politics. So look for opportunities with the Respect Voters Coalition, respectvoters.org, to reform money in politics. You can also head to our website, showmeintegrity.org, and do the same. But I recommend going straight to the coalition. So that's the main way. And you can certainly follow us at Show Me Integrity or Respect Voters on any social media platform. I don't think we have a TikTok yet with fun democracy dance videos, but we'll work on that.
Please send me links whenever you figure that out. I would love to see it. Cool. Thanks so much, Benjamin. And as we kind of close out the panelist discussion and move into the Q&A, I did want to take a second and ask the three of our panelists today if they had any final closing thoughts that they want to share about any of the things that we've talked about today, anything kind of lingering in your mind that you wanted to share. And please feel free to chime in.
Well, I'll jump in real quick. For me, I think some of the potential advantages of democracy dollars are, like Rochelle discussed, getting what we call low propensity voters, younger people, people of color, lower income people who don't turn out to vote in those elections. When we talk about our local elections, like in April, we have 20% voter turnout. And so that means a very small percentage of people are making the decisions for what happens in this region. So getting folks engaged, increasing that voter registration, voter turnout, I think is huge. Another aspect that I've noticed in our politics over the last several years that I think the democracy dollars would try to address is requiring candidates to face the public, to have a debate, to have town halls, to have discussions. We've seen in race after race in recent years where kind of well-funded incumbents just won't have a public debate. And that is a lack of accountability and transparency right there. So these requirements could help with that. And lastly, our research shows that in the St. Louis region that women, Black men, and particularly Black women, have to work a lot harder to raise the same amount of money as white men who are candidates in the St. Louis region. And one way they have to do that is get a lot of small dollar donations, and often, particularly for Black women, even going out of state and trying to raise those funds. So this could give an opportunity for those sorts of candidates to raise that money right here in St. Louis from people who are residents of the area.
Thanks so much, Anita. Benjamin, Rochelle, any closing thoughts?
I'll hop in here. Anita's absolutely right. And one thing that we have to acknowledge is people ask, what about Citizens United and where American constitutional law is now? And what we've seen with these systems is there's still outside money that tries to come in, but it has not been able to sway it. And in fact, in Seattle, the last election, from what I was told and observed and saw in the studies, is that the candidates who were seen as taking on the big money, where the big Amazon spending through a super PAC was on the other side, it's the community powered candidates who won, who had that buy-in from the community. And because this is an optional system, it has to be robust enough to work for the candidates who use it and to take on that big money on the other side. And that's something we learned from like presidential campaign financing, which now almost no presidential candidate uses because it wasn't sufficient. So it needs to be a robust system. And again, because it's optional, which allows you to go around Citizens United, because this isn't a requirement to agree to all these additional conditions, is you can require that they participate in those debates or those voter guides like Anita was talking about. So if we really want a democracy where people feel that they have agency and they aren't inclined to blame immigrants or someone else for the problem, but where they feel like they can have a say in our political system and they have agency and control over their lives and the direction of the government that affects them, that is a way that whether we're Black, white, or brown, we can all work together and have our collective power elect candidates who make our government work for all residents of the St. Louis region and the state of Missouri.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. Rochelle?
Yes, just a couple of things. I've already mentioned, it is important to be able to have more people from different groups, different diverse groups to run, and like I said, some simply just cannot afford to do that. So this is a perfect program. Like I said, historically, low income voters couldn't participate. Historically, low income residents can't run against someone who has the money, should I say. So this is important to make, changes, and we can have more diversity. And that I can't emphasize that enough. And it's just good all around to make the voters feel more comfortable and that they're more included.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. And thanks so much to all of our wonderful panelists for the insights that they've provided so far. We still have more to come for our webinar today, though, and I'm going to keep picking on our wonderful panelist brains as we move into the Q&A. So we have a couple of questions already, but if you have questions, please pop them into the Q&A chat. And I will read them out loud. I'm going to start with a question from Margaret Weck. And this is the question is, how much resistance do you predict there would be from the state political party organizations for something like this?
If I can chime in, and being nonpartisan, there is of course you're going to get some pushback from certain parties, those that are typically historically used to running elections from based on getting a lot of donations from wealthier voters. So those are the people who are going to push back, not necessarily the state party, but those members of that particular party who, like I said, are normally used to running based on large PAC donations and, of course, donors. So, yeah, I do predict there will be some pushback from those particular parties or that particular party.
Benjamin, Anita, anything to add?
I think a unique situation in St. Louis County that makes it an early candidate, and you may see this in Springfield or other areas if they're first to get this done, is there's broad dissatisfaction across political lines, across party lines with the status quo in local government. So whereas at state and federal levels, things do get even more partisan, not saying partisanship doesn't exist at that local level, but when you have broad dissatisfaction across political lines where people don't feel like they're being listened to in local government, that's an opportunity for a lot of unity and feeling like, okay, let's restore a system where it feels like decisions are being made because they're right for the people, not for someone's particular political agenda.
Awesome. Thanks so much. The next question that we have in the chat right now is from Liz Callahan. And Liz states, democracy dollars sound great, but how do we avoid them continuing to be drowned out by large dollar donors and corporations that can put unlimited amounts into PACs? I
I don't know if I don't know if that was dropped in before I spoke to how we saw it play out in Seattle, but yeah, Amazon and some other big players who are trying to by influence, by politicians, by policy in the Seattle City Council lost pretty much every race where they were backing a candidate because voters saw who and felt and experienced who was supporting them because they had contributed their vouchers. We see record levels of participation by people handing over those vouchers. We decided to call them certificates because vouchers have a different connotation here in Missouri, but they'd given those officials their certificates, their democracy dollars, and those were the candidates that were winning. In New York, where they had a different type of democracy dollar system where it was a multiple match, you still again saw some of that big money that previously was going into candidate races go into those outside super PACs like you're talking about. Is that Meg who is asking this question? Margaret Weck? Yeah. And instead, what the strategy they did was they realized they couldn't actually change who was winning. They started to just back whoever they thought was going to win so they could try to curry favor and influence. So basically what we see is when you design a system that's strong enough, it's able to withstand that outside money and that people power really wins. And we've seen that at in a lot of races, primaries and general elections, where you see sometimes the winning candidate is not the one who actually spent the most money. But you just need to have enough money to compete. So as long as we're able to create a system where community-backed candidates, publicly financed candidates have enough money to run a robust campaign, they can still win.
Thanks, Benjamin. Anita or Rochelle, anything to chime in with this question? I'm happy to reread it. All right. Any other questions from the chat?
One thing I alluded to earlier while we wait for an additional question, I talked about how voter turnout actually went up, and this is mentioned in the report. So there's people, as we all know, who show up to vote in like every election. That's maybe 15-20% of people who even like Anita, like Rochelle, like myself, who will show up even for those local races or those primaries. That's a minority of people. That's not representative. A lot of people don't know about those elections. They don't show up and participate. They don't care. They don't feel like government works for them. Why should they bother to participate? But what we saw in Seattle is if one of those infrequent voters was organized, was reached out to in their community and actually donated a voucher to a candidate, boom, they became 400% more likely to actually show up and vote because now they have skin in the game. Someone has bothered to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm going to fight for you for affordable housing or paid sick leave or for getting lead out of these communities that's poisoning people. So it really aligns the incentives of the people and the candidates, and people feel it and they're showing up to vote and they're participating in bigger numbers. The fact that the racial wealth gap is being closed at the political participation level by this, as we're seeing now that participation is dramatically higher in the last Seattle election, and that low-income communities in some cases are being overrepresented in the amount of vouchers being contributed, is just amazing.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I'll give it another minute or two. Oh, there is one coming in now from Liz Callahan. Is the PAC system similar in Washington and New York to what it is in Missouri? It's my understanding we have some of the laxest laws in the country.
Okay, I hate to do all the talking, but I feel like folks are waiting for me to answer this as the national campaign finance guy.
Who, you?
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, I'm just
But please, Rochelle and Anita, to the extent you can speak to this, please do. Missouri did get a reputation for being the Wild West of campaign finance, rightfully so, because the legislature repealed campaign contribution limits. And from 2008 to 2016, we saw a huge increase in spending from out of district, from out of state. We saw fewer and fewer constituents contributing and larger amounts of money being contributed from folks who were contributing. And that's also mentioned in the report. Now, in 2016, voters did vote for limits. That was actually something funded by a conservative activist who funded that campaign finance reform measure. Again, I want to emphasize my earlier point that this is something that resonates across the political lines. But there's still this, he wasn't a campaign finance expert, and there was still this glaring loophole where these independent PACs, if I run for office, I could still go ask someone to donate $1 billion to this independent PAC. I'm not going to have anything to do with how that money's spent, but I think it would be great if you donated to the Benjamin PAC. And so there's still that implicit quid pro quo where I know you're there for me, and therefore when I'm in office, I'm going to be there for you. And what I think is helpful for folks to think about is this is the money primary. We know you have to win a primary to get to the general election, but for you to even get to the point where you're competitive in a primary, you need to raise enough money. That's the money primary. Right now, the easiest way to do that is by going to big donors and having them give unlimited donations to your independent PAC. So absolutely, that is a loophole that can be closed at the local level and at the state level.
Yes, being touched on something that is absolutely true. One candidate can have several PACs that are focused on his or her election here in Missouri. So although we did come up with, like he said, limits, those PACs they're unlimited, or the donation to their PAC is unlimited. And so people can kind of sort of hide behind those PACs, and no one really know, unless people don't know to look, should I say, maybe that's a better way to put it. They don't know that they can look up these donations, look up the PACs to see who they donated to. So just here in Missouri, it was actually gotten worse after the law was passed. It's actually gotten worse here. It didn't help. So money, like I said, in the primary was being thrown behind certain candidates in unbelievable amounts. And some of those were what you may consider to be a local election. So, because it was just at the county level or the city level, not the municipalities again. So he's absolutely right. I just didn't speak because I'm not sure about New York and Washington. I don't study those, but I do know here is pretty bad. The situation is pretty, I don't want to use the word bad, but it's not where it should be. And again, it's funny and unfortunate that it's worse than before the law passed. So
Yeah, and part of what makes it worse is that the lack of transparency that PACs have. So that's why we call them dark money sometimes. We have candidates come to campus to speak, and if we give them a gift bag with a UMSL mug, a keychain, and a pin, that surpasses what we can legally donate to them because the value is more than, $20. But meanwhile, if I had $100,000, I could send it right to their PAC, and no one would be any the wiser. So I see that a link to the Missouri Ethics Commission is there. That's where we get our data for our research. You can look at all the campaign contributions there. But yeah, you have to find those PACs if you really want to follow the money.
Thanks so much, y'all. The next question in the chat is from Don Logue, who asks, what are your plans for implementing this change in St. Louis County?
The best possibility for making this happen in St. Louis County is going to the St. Louis County Council, which has not been satisfied with the status quo, and having them place this measure on the ballot for voters to have a say on whether the system should be created and put into place. In a few years ago, we actually had a town hall, and every member of the county council showed up. Hal Goldsmith, who had prosecuted the previous county executive, also gave remarks, and every member of the county council at that time said, I think it was every member who was there, said that they were inclined to support this, depending on making sure that the funding was there. And so that's why it's important to create that dedicated revenue stream, so you're not competing with other county services, ideally. So that is the best way to get it done in the county level. And if you want to get involved and help, please go to respectvoters.org and sign up and join us.
Thanks so much, Benjamin.
Oh, and if they won't do that, we can gather signatures to put it on the ballot. Sorry about that.
No, thank you for the addition. Any other thoughts, Anita, Rochelle, on this question? That's all right. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat at the moment. I'll hold for a little bit just in case some other ones come in. Right. Well, if there are no other questions at the moment, I am happy, if everyone else is okay with it, to give folks their time back this morning. If you do have questions after our time here together today, please feel free to email us, and we will be happy to answer in whatever way we can. My wonderful colleague Ja has put several wonderful links in the webinar chat. Please do check these out. Some of these links are for campaign finance laws and rules, and then links to the Missouri Ethics Commission, as well as some articles that contain some really useful information. So please do check those out. Like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. But I want to take a moment and thank each of our panelists for being here this morning and answering these questions, and with a degree of eloquence that I really do appreciate. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.